Okay, so this chapter on debugging may be the most important of all in some ways, and by the time you learn it, you might be wishing you had learned it at the beginning. However, the problem is sometimes it's tough to understand these concepts until you've been through it a bit, so to speak. So I've got it here as chapter 11. Your instructor might put it somewhere else in the book, but let's walk through the 3 different types of errors you will deal with when writing any kind of code. This applies to everything, not just Python. So let's go from easiest to find and fix to most difficult. So starting with syntax errors. Let's copy this, or we can just type it in. I've got it back over here in a Google Colab file. Notice as you first type it, improt pandas as PD. Do you get any indication that you've made a mistake? Now, a syntax error is an improper spelling or some sort of syntax that's missing, like a or like a colon or a tab problem or other things like that within Python. So take a look at this. Do you get any indication that you've made a mistake? If you're used to coding in other languages, you might at first think no, because some other IDEs will actually give you like a red squiggly underline. The indication ahead of time that you've made a mistake often depends on the quality of the editor that you're using. Colab is fairly new, it's web-based, so I don't get anything other than notice that because I misspelled improt, it's actually not colored the way it normally would be if I were to type import pandas as PD. So notice when I type a keyword correctly, it turns purple here, and when it's incorrect, it stays black. Now, pandas is a name of a package, and PD is a variable name. So because the package names are not something native to the Python interpreter, nor is obviously a variable name, these are something the user defines, those things will always be in black. So let me show you what happens here. Let's run this, and it says you've got invalid syntax, and it gives me this error code right here, tells me what line it's on, tries to point out where it thinks the error is, and then a name of the error. It's a syntax error, invalid syntax, and a button. So each of these key elements here are useful. First of all, line 1, obviously I knew where it was, but if you have a lot of code, that can help. This arrow is clearly pointing at the wrong thing. My problem isn't with the keyword pandas, so why is it pointing there? Well, here's what's happening. The interpreter looks at improt. It's not a word it recognizes, so it assumes it must be a variable name. Well, we find variable names all the time as the first thing in a line. For example, if I were to say variable equals 6, notice the word variable is in black. I could name it whatever I want. And because it's a variable, it'll always be in black. It's not a word recognized by the interpreter. So what is Python doing? Well, it says up here, okay, we see the word improt. It must be a variable name since it's not a keyword. But if you have a variable name, we're expecting after that there to be an equal sign, like an assignment statement. But there is no equal sign. Instead, we see another word, pandas, which isn't in the Python interpreter. And so it thinks, okay, you tried to use 2 variable names in a row, and therefore it put the arrow right here on pandas as the problem. So these arrows, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. They're not always going to get it right, but it does tell you if you see an arrow that the error is going to be either on the word it's pointing to or somewhere before it. Usually not going to be after the arrow. So I look at this and I say, wait, pandas isn't the problem. There's my misspelling. So syntax error, we get a code here that we can use to search. It's a standard error message, and it'll come regardless of whether the syntax error was with the import, or what if we did spell that right and we actually did it with has on accident. Invalid syntax error. Same type of problem. So the general error message is somewhat useful because it tells you the general category, but it's even more useful, at least with Google Colab, because you get this button right here, Search Stack Overflow. So if you're brand new to programming, know that Stack Overflow is one of the most common, or is the most common really, website there is for finding and getting help. So in this case, what it does is it takes this entire error message right here, including that in this case, and searches for it on a website called stackoverflow.com. Now, in this case, it didn't help much, but I just want you to see how this works. So first of all, it took all the text from the line and everything down here. And then if you didn't know this about Google, you can use the keyword site : and then tell it what website you want to search. Now in this case, it found nothing because this error message was too specific. This has something very specific to do with that word that I misspelled, and also it's got those keywords right here. All right, most people aren't going to search for this on Stack Overflow. They're going to catch their error, so they won't find it. So let's delete some of this, the stuff that's a little too specific, and maybe go all the way down to syntax error, and let's search for that instead. So I click on that, and I see here's Stack Overflow, and a lot of people with questions about the syntax error. So I can scroll through these and then look at examples that people give me on Stack Overflow for. Usually what they'll do is they'll post their code. Here's what I was doing. And look here, they even told you the error's right here somewhere. And then you get people that add comments. Here's a quick comment. And then other people that will come on here and give more in-depth examples with code to explain how to solve their problem. And what's amazing, if you're brand new to programming, you're going to learn that the coding community is one of the most altruistic out there. And some people might laugh at that, but I mean, look at this. There are people on here who have given answer after answer, and then other people who come on here and they upvote which answers they like the best. That is a massive amount of crowdsourcing to create a knowledge base on a website about programming problems. And in fact, there's a Stack Overflow developer survey that shows that Python, I think, is currently the most searched for topic on their website. I just want to check that real quick. Developer survey right there. Let's grab the latest one. Although it's 2020, they haven't done it yet this year, but I'm just going to search for Python. All right, so web frameworks, programming. All right, here we go. Most popular technologies. All right, this is based on their survey. I know there's a most searched for on there, where Python I think is even higher now, but JavaScript is more for the web and for cross-platform development, web, database. Python is the first true programming language. Well, server-side programming language, I guess you could call it, at least above a lot of these others. In other words, you're going to find tons of help on Python on here. So in this case, this isn't particularly useful because a syntax error is usually pretty easy to spot. So I'm just going to come on here and fix it and move on. All right, there we go. Fix it, rerun. There we go, all good to go. Okay, let's move on to the next type of errors. And by the way, if you have the time, please do read through all this in the book. Just talks about basics of preventing syntax errors and well, you can take a look at it. Moving on, runtime errors. These are errors that you can't detect ahead of time because there's going to be no indication that you've made a mistake. Unlike here, when we spelled the word incorrectly, the color of the word indicated that we had a syntax problem. Runtime errors has no syntax issues. However, it's going to create an issue once you run the code. So let me show you this example here. This is the classic, every programming class book teaches runtime errors with some example like this. See if you can look at this and figure out what's going on here. The problem is, we need to track a patient's average heart rate over time. Assume that the list of heart rates below is being collected one at a time every 2 minutes. Okay, so here's my heart rate over time every 2 minutes. Task, calculate and print the average heart rate repeatedly as each rate is collected from the list. So every time a heart rate comes in, let's print out the average that goes through all of the values that we have. Okay, so I've got a couple of variables I initialize here to use to keep track of, to calculate my average, the total number of heart rates, the sum or the total of all heart rates, and then the count of how many we've collected. We'll need that to calculate the average. Also, we're going to need a loop, because if we want to print out every time a heart rate comes in, we're going to print it out one at a time. We're going to have to loop through that list. So we have here for rate and heart rates, that makes sense. Rate's going to represent each one of these numbers in the list. You've been through the loops chapter, so hopefully that makes sense to you. Down here, the total, we're using this simplified plus equals format. If you don't remember this, don't be confused. It's just basically saying total equals total plus rate. So total is going to equal whatever the prior total was plus the new rate that's just been added in. First time through the loop, total is going to be 0 because it's 0 right here. So total is going to equal 0 plus the first rate that comes in, 64. Total equals rate. And here you can start to see where we're probably going to have an error. Count, we're going to do the same thing. It's going to plus equal 1. We're going to add 1 to count each time, indicating total number of heart rates. And we're going to print the total divided by the count, which should give us the average. So hopefully you see the problem. If not, no problem, we'll explain it. So I get this error, division by 0. Notice these are all variable names, so they're all black, that's normal. My for is a keyword, in's a keyword, those are colored properly. Numbers are colored properly. There's no syntax errors here at all. There's no way to detect this if I didn't see the code. Well, there are ways, we'll get to that, but I don't detect it until the program actually runs and I get what's called a division by 0 error. That's undefined, you can't divide by 0, which is exactly what I'm doing right here on this line. So again, it gives me the line, that's the problem. In this case, this is accurate. This is the line that's creating the problem. However, the cause of the line is our logic above this, or our logic around it. In particular, we're incrementing the count after the total is printed out, which in a lot of scenarios that's normal. When you're looping through and you want to keep track of a count, you iterate or increment at the end of whatever task you're doing. But that's not going to work for this context because the first time through counts 0. So what do we do to fix it? First of all, let me show you again through Stack Overflow things we can do. In this case, 0 division error. See, this is a different name of the error. Up here, it was a syntax error. That's our error message. So this is the global message and a bit more of a specific message. And then global message, more specific message. So I click on search Stack Overflow, and here's all the different Stack Overflow sites where someone's done this. And you can just pull up someone's example. It says, here's what I'm doing. How do I avoid this error in Python? My desired output is z equals 0, but I can't do that if I've got to divide y by z. And so they say, catch the error and handle it. We'll talk about this in just a second. So I can use this site for an example of someone who's fixing the code. But let me explain what they're about to do in a second here. First of all, we could fix it in a couple ways. In this case, I just move count up here, and that's not going to be a problem anymore. Because I say the total initially is 0, add the rate to it, the count is 0, add 1 to it, then print the total out. So if you're not sure what's going on here, let me go ahead and print that out along with, I'm going to print out, and here's one way you can, we'll do it like this, print, I'm going to show you another method. You can use the end function in a print command to tell it to end the line with nothing, which means don't add a line break. So for example, if I do it there's no line break after each one. So what I'm going to add next is say print total, and same thing, end equals nothing, and then print count. And that one I'll leave the end as is, so it does create a line break. And what I'm going to do here is say print total. If I do that, yeah, it prints it right there. So what I want is total, add to that, and then I've got to turn the total into a string for that to work. And I'm going to do the same thing down here, give it just a nice label. Whoops. Count, count. Oh, maybe I should learn how to use spaces. Total, count, oops. There we go, okay. So first time through the loop, I'm showing you this not because it's actually relevant to the errors, well, sort of is, but I know you're still new if you're using this book or this video series, and this might be your first time. I want you to see how things iterate through a loop. So the first time into the loop, for rate and heart rates, the total, I process that here, I add rate to it, add count, print out total divided by count, which gives us this number right here, 64 divided by 164. And I want to print those variables out each time, just so that you can see what their values are each time through the loop. So next time through the loop, it prints out 66. Well, that's because 68 came in. Actually, you know what we're going to do here? I'm going to make this even better. So you can see everything. See a loop incrementing table. And let's print out here one more. Let's do one for rate. And let's call this, I'll call it HR for heart rate. And here, instead of total count, I'm going to print out the rate object that we're iterating through. All right, so let me show you what you're seeing now. This, instead of total, I'm going to call this is average. There we go. Oh, whoops, I forgot to make rate a string. So there's an error in my own code about showing you how to debug. So I get this one, actually, I should show you here. Must be str, not int. So I look at this. This is also a runtime error. Notice that there was nothing wrong with my code right here, but as soon as I ran it, it said, okay, this line 9, type error. All right, what's type error? Well, it's if you, again, same process. You can search Stack Overflow, Python type error must be string. Someone says, hey, I'm getting the type error problem. You look down. In fact, here's the exact same thing. Someone says, print. Here's what you're trying to do right here. And this line right here, the furnace is now, someone's trying to print out how hot it is. He says, you've got to cast it to str. Temperature has to be a string. It's trying to add text to a number, and so it thinks you're trying to do a mathematical operation and add text to a string. So I look at that example and I see, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to do the same thing right here by adding rate, a number, to the text HR. So it thinks I'm trying to do a mathematical operation, not concatenate text together. So I do the same thing that they did, str around that, and now I've got the same problem right here, exact same thing, str. Look at that. Beautiful. All right, so what I've created here, I call it a loop table or an incrementing table or something like that. Basically, it lets me see what the values of my variables are every loop through this for rate and heart rates. So I print out my actual rate, my processing, my formula, my other variables. So I can look at this and see, okay, first time through, I get their heart rate 64. My average is calculated as 64 because my total is 1 and my count is 1. I think I prefer putting this one at the end. Now I'm being a bit obsessive compulsive here. It makes more sense to review the count and the average, or the total and the average first before showing the, or total and count before the average. All right, heart rate 64, total 64, counts 1, average 64 makes sense. Next time through the loop, I get 68 in right here. That brings my total to 132, my count to 2, so my average is now 64. And I can go through each one of these and see exactly how my data and my variables are progressing as this loop increments, or how they're changing and updating. So if I had count down here previously, like I did before, I could print all of these things out right here and then see what's going on. So in this case, I see, okay, my loop table, it worked one time, 64, total 64, count 0, but it didn't print out average. And now I can see, oh yeah, if it didn't print that out, now I get it. It's because my count was 0. I was trying to divide 64 by 0. So even if I didn't have that message right there that told me what was going on, my loop incrementing table, or my looping table, revealed to me what the value of the variables were, and I can see, oh, that's my problem right there. All right, so I come in here and fix it. Put that back up here once more. So fixing runtime errors. First of all, a few things we've learned. Look at the syntax and search Stack Overflow. That helps a lot. In fact, let me go back and break this again. Let me leave it that way. Okay. I get the error type right here. I get the line that it's pointing to. Also notice, though, that even though it's pointing to line 11, again, it's possible that the problem's coming from somewhere up above. All right. I'm going to call, how do we handle syntax errors? Well, this is a very simple example right here. A much more common example is going to be something like this one. Let me show you what's going on here. Okay, so in this problem, we're saying at lendingstore.com, we have a batch of 4 new loan applications. We have the applicant's monthly income and debt payments pulled from their credit report and tax statements. We want to use this information to determine how likely they are to pay off a loan. So, okay, our task is to calculate and print a new metric called debt to income ratio as debt divided by income for each applicant, period. Assume that the debts and incomes are listed in order, meaning the first entry in each list applies to the same applicant and so forth. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got. A variable called applicant dictionary with a key called debt and a list, and then income and a list. Okay, so I take it to mean that right here that the first debt is for the same person of the first income and so forth. All right, that makes sense. I got to go through and calculate DTI for each one of these people and print it out. So I'm going to go and say 5,000 divided by 9,300, print that out and so forth. And you can see we're going to get to a situation right here where I'm going to have it divided by 0 error. The reason why I'm showing you this example is because let's assume that this data wasn't something we typed in. Typically, when we're writing this code, the data might come from somewhere else entirely. So if you're a data scientist, you might be connecting to a database somewhere or an API and pulling data automatically out of a database or website and then wanting to process it. So you don't get to control what these values are right here. Somebody else has got their own system in place to validate inputs and make sure that only valid values come through. So since there's nothing you can do about it, you could end up getting runtime errors that aren't your fault. So we can prepare for that and account for it in a few ways. So let's first talk through the rest of this code. So here's what this is doing. I'm not sure if in your class if you've covered the enumerate function or not, but what this is doing here is saying, all right, let's do a loop. Instead of just saying for debt in applicant dictionary, if I want to get down to this list, actually I'm going to back up here and show you. I could say for debt in applicant dictionary, and I could then grab the key debt, and I could then print out each of those debts. Let me show you that first, and we have an error, but we'll come to that. First thing that happened right here is that worked out. It printed out each one of the debts in that list. So the problem is I think what this code was written to do was that they've also got to then get the income out of over here. And so they use the enumerate function. And what that does is it says, okay, as you're scrolling through and getting each debt, go ahead and make another variable to keep track of the index that you're in. And in this case, I think I'm going to relabel this to index here so that it's easier to understand what it represents. In fact, I'll call it I for index. That's usually what we call it in the enumerate function. Whoops, I. Okay, so this says, as you scroll through and get the debts, use I to kind of be a counter and keep track of where you're at, much like count was doing right here. This will accomplish the same thing without having to create a count variable. So hence the enumerate function. So let me just show you so you can see right here. Print I and print, let's create our loop table just like before. Print debt. Okay. So I got this error down here. So I want to start printing out my variables one at a time to see what's going on. So I'm going to comment that line of code out, and I print these two variables one at a time to see what's happening. All right, actually, you know what? I don't need this one anymore. I think you get the idea of that one. So let's just use this loop. Okay, so I've got I and then debt, I and then debt. So my initial is always 0, my first index, and my first debt value is 5,000. Second index 1, second value 100, and so forth. Okay, so that's working fine. It's this line right here that's giving me the problem. So when I run that, I say, okay, division by 0. Why is it by 0? Well, I don't understand. I've got debt divided by, well, what's this doing? All right, they're trying to get the income out of applicant dictionary. So let's print that out at the same time. Applicant dictionary, and they're saying income, and then I. Okay. Oh, and I should print it. All right, then back to commenting that line out. All right, so now I've got the count, the income, sorry, the debt, and then whatever this is right here. Okay, so it says go to the applicant dictionary. There's the key income. Okay, go here. And then after that, it's saying go inside to the value. So by putting this square bracket here, it assumes that whatever the value is of income is going to be a list. And it's something that we can get by index. So we know that I, the first time through, represents 0 because we printed it out right here. Okay, so if we put 0 right there, we're saying go to applicant, dictionary, go to income, and go to the 0 index and pull that out. Oh, there it is. Got it. Okay. And since we use the I up here in the definition of the for loop, we don't need to explicitly increment it like we did right here with count. See, here we didn't have the count up here in the for loop. We could actually use the enumerate function and do the same thing right here if we wanted to. But anyway, so down here, this makes sense now. I've got the index, the debt, and then the income printed out for each of them. Well, as I look through here and delete this, I find out that my problem is coming not on the first loop through, not on the second loop through. Actually, what's being printed right here, I'm printing round debt divided by income rounded 2 decimal places. Okay. Let's see here. However, I'm getting this weird 2 right over here. So let me take a look at that and see, okay, why would I be getting a 2? We're supposed to be printing debt to income ratio, which should be a percentage. Well, as I look at this and see, okay, somehow it's returning the number 1. Well, and then the number 2 here. Oh, you know, as I take a look at this, I notice I've got this round function, and here's everything inside the round function. There's our opening parenthesis and the closing parenthesis. Wait a minute, this 2 decimal places in the wrong spot. This is actually an example of a logic error, and I'm going to come back to some more examples of these a bit later. This was an unintentional logic error in my example. Anyway, let's pull that out and put it right here where it goes. That 2 means take this value in the round function, round that, and then whatever value that gives us, change it to 2 decimal places. So let's run that one now. Okay, here we go. Now I've got a 0 index, debt, income. 54% of that person's income is being used to pay debts each month. All right, this person, their index is 1, their debt's 100, income's 4,500. Only 2% of their income is being used to pay debts. This person looks like they're up to 18% of a DTI, and then number 3, it says, well, I don't know, I didn't get a DTI. I got their index, I got their debt, I got their income, but somehow that division right here, this last line, is not working, and I can see, oh, you know what, division by 0. Once again, I'm dividing my income, my debt, by an income of 0. But this time it wasn't my fault, because this data, we're going to assume, came from somewhere else. So what can I do about that? Well, a few things. The simplest technique to fix this, I could do something along these lines right here. I could use a simple if statement and say if income is, let's say, less than or equal to, because income shouldn't be negative. So I can say less than or equal to 0, then print it. Otherwise, if it's not that, I can say something to the effect of print invalid, oops, maybe I should use quotes, invalid income, no DTI, or maybe I can say DTI not calculated. All right, so I bet I got a logic, looks like I've got a logic error here now. So I'm saying if income is less than, oh, here we go. If it's, I've got this reversed. If it's greater than or equal to 0, no, if it's simply greater than, not equal to. If it's greater than 0, go ahead and calculate DTI as planned. If it's not greater than 0, that means it's either 0 or less, then I'm going to print out that right there. And I've got a typo as usual. Let's check and see here. It says division by 0, if income is greater than, but this should not have worked here. Oh, I never called it income. I can't just say if income is greater than 0. I've got to actually reference this right here. Income is not defined anywhere. So I'm going to change this to that. There we go. So if that calculation, or if that referenced index of income as we go through the loop is greater than or equal to 0, go ahead and print out the DTI. We get it right there. Otherwise, if it's 0 or less, print out invalid income, DTI not calculated. So this is nice. This works. What's the disadvantage of this? Just using an if statement. The disadvantage is that there may be other types of inputs that I don't think about that are a problem. Maybe it's greater than 0, but it's an imaginary number. I don't know. But there are other contexts where you just might not think of every possible error or issue that could come up under the sun if you use a simple if statement. So I'm going to copy this down to a different example. And I want to teach you a try except clause. In other languages, we call this a try catch block, or try catch else, try catch finally. I'm just going to show you the most basic one, and then where you can go to learn more about it. So here's the way a try catch works. We simply use the keyword try, and below this, instead of a catch in Python, we call it except. And down here I'll say print out invalid, or no, I can't say, I'm not going to say invalid income, could be anything. So I'm just going to simply print, in this case, an error occurred. And maybe I'll print out the variables with values, and I can use my f-string format. Hopefully you learned that earlier in this course. If not, it's pretty straightforward. Just put the f in front of that, and then I can use these braces and just refer to some variable names. For values, I'll say right here, debt, and maybe I'll put it in parentheses and put debt here. For values, debt, comma, I, so my parentheses first, I, and then lastly, income. And I'll copy my reference right here, applicant dictionary, and paste that in there. Okay. All right, now I've got my own print problem right here. Got an invalid syntax down here on income. I believe that's because I have to put a variable name here. Let me see if that's true. I'm going to make something right here called income equals that, and then let's put income right here instead and see if that was my problem. Yep, there we go. So when using an f string, it doesn't want to perform an index lookup within the string. I just have to put a variable name, and that's it. All right, so try except. Same thing, worked on the first three, and then on the last one, when it tried to print, it instead switched down here to the except block. So what it does is it says, kind of like the if, well, a little bit different from the if. It'll try to calculate this, and if the compiler or the interpreter is about to throw an error, it will, rather than throw the error, switch and process this code instead. So I get more of a friendly error message. I should have a space right there. Friendly error message, and my program continues running until it's done. So that's a useful way to, it doesn't fix every problem, but at least lets your program continue in some way, shape, or form rather than stop. So there's lots of ways to customize this. In fact, if you come here in the book down at the bottom, I've got some documentation details for you here. I'm not going to go through all these in this video, but there's different types of exceptions. So for example, I just use the word except, but there's different, you can refer to the error name, that error code that we were getting back up here. For example, syntax error. I could say except syntax error and have multiple except blocks for different types of errors to catch in case I want to do different things depending on the type of the error. Oops, meant to over here. All right, let me show you an example here of a couple other options in the documentation. So else and finally. Here's that division by zero error example I was just talking about. Well, or specific types of exceptions I was talking about. So in this example, they tried to divide two numbers. If the y is 0, then they can throw an exception, but a specific type, and catch 0 division errors. And then, like I said before, you can have multiple types of errors being handled. Else and finally are two very useful features. Else is going to be processed only if the try worked and there's no error thrown. Finally gets processed regardless of whether it worked or not. So you don't have to use both. You can use one or the other. There's all kinds of examples of try, except, else, finally. But here's one reason why you might want to implement these. Let's say that you've got to connect to a database. Database connections require memory and processing power, and you don't want to leave them open. A connection gets opened and closed separately. So you might use a try block to open the database connection. And if it doesn't work, or let's say that you try some sort of processing on the data you pull, and that throws an error. Well, in that case, if an error is thrown, it's possible that database connection will never get closed. So what you can do is have down in the finally block a close database connection here. So whether there's an error or not, it attempts to close the database connection. Or in the else, what you might do is say, all right, you opened it, you tried to do some processing, didn't work. Or it did work. And let's close the data reader object or something like that. Anyway, I think I've gone too far on that one. So let's hang it up now for this video. We've covered syntax errors and runtime errors, and even gave you a few of my own unintentional examples of logic errors. But I want to go through a more comprehensive logic error video in the next section.